The weight of words. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs as I stood frozen in my daughter's doorway. God, Mom, you're so embarrassing. I told everyone at school that you're dead. The casual cruelty in 16-year-old Sarah's voice, as she spoke into her phone, unaware of my presence, would echo in my mind for months to come. My name is Margaret Chen, and at 42, I thought I understood the shape of heartbreak. I'd survived my husband's departure 3 years earlier, rebuilt our finances from nothing, and learned to navigate single motherhood while working as a night shift nurse at County General. But nothing had prepared me for the particular agony of being erased by the person I loved most in this world. I backed away from her doorway that Tuesday evening in October, my worn sneakers silent on the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself the summer after David left. The house felt different suddenly, not like the sanctuary I'd worked so hard to create, but like a museum of my own irrelevance. In the kitchen, I stood with my hands pressed against the cold granite countertop, watching the steam rise from the dinner I'd prepared between sleep and my next 12-hour shift. Chicken teriyaki, her favorite. Or what used to be her favorite, back when she still admitted to having preferences that aligned with mine. The betrayal wasn't just in the words themselves, though they cut deep enough. It was in the realization that I had become something to be ashamed of, something to be hidden away like an embarrassing family secret. When had I transformed from the mother who used to make her laugh with silly voices while reading bedtime stories into this specter she wished would disappear? I thought of the other mothers at school events, the ones with fresh manicures and SUVs that weren't held together with prayer and determination, the ones who didn't smell faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion, who didn't have to check their phones during parent-teacher conferences to make sure no one at the hospital needed them. Perhaps Sarah wasn't wrong to be embarrassed. Perhaps I had become exactly what she said I was, an inconvenience, a reminder of a life that didn't measure up to her friends' Instagram-worthy existences. The weeks that followed took on a strange, hollow quality. I found myself moving through our interactions like an actor in a play I hadn't auditioned for. Sarah would emerge from her room for meals, her phone always in hand, her responses to my questions monosyllabic. I stopped asking about her day, stopped commenting on her friends, stopped trying to bridge the growing chasm between us. What was the point? I was apparently already dead to her world. At the hospital, my colleagues noticed the change. "You're quieter than usual, Maggie," observed Dr. Rodriguez one night as we worked side by side in the ICU. I wanted to tell him that I was practicing being invisible, that I was learning to take up less space in the world, since that seemed to be what my daughter needed from me. Instead, I just smiled and made some excuse about being tired. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my nights caring for other people's loved ones, holding the hands of strangers' daughters while my own daughter counted down the days until she could escape me entirely. I poured myself into my work with an intensity that bordered on reckless, picking up extra shifts, volunteering for the most difficult cases. If I was going to be a ghost in my own home, at least I could be useful elsewhere. It was during one of these extra shifts in November that I met Mrs. Eleanor Vasquez, an 83-year-old woman admitted with pneumonia. Her family visited in shifts, filling her room with laughter and gentle arguments about who made the best tamales. Watching them, I felt a familiar ache in my chest. "You have children, Mija?" Mrs. Vasquez asked me one evening as I adjusted her IV. "A daughter," I replied, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "She's 16. The old woman's eyes sparkled with recognition. "Ah, the terrible age. My Maria, she was the same. Told me I was ruining her life just by breathing." She chuckled, but there was understanding in her voice. "She's a doctor now, comes to see me every Sunday, brings her own daughter, who thinks I'm the most wonderful abuela in the world." "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious. Mrs. Vasquez was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands folding over the blanket. "Time, Mia. And truth. Eventually they see who you really are, not who they think you should be." I wanted to believe her, but as November melted into December, Sarah's coldness only intensified. She spent most of her time at friends' houses, coming home only to sleep and collect clean clothes. When she did speak to me, it was usually to ask for money or permission for some activity that would take her further away from our house, from me. The breaking point came just before Christmas break. I'd picked up a shift on Christmas Eve, partly because the hospital needed coverage, but mostly because the thought of sitting alone in our decorated living room while Sarah texted her friends upstairs felt unbearable. When I came home the next morning, exhausted and still in my scrubs, I found her in the kitchen making breakfast for herself. "Merry Christmas," I said softly, hoping for some acknowledgement of the day, of the presents I'd wrapped and placed under the tree. She looked up from her phone just long enough to register my presence, then returned to her screen. Whatever, something inside me finally broke, not with anger, but with a kind of grief so profound it felt like drowning. I walked to my room and closed the door, then sat on the edge of my bed and allowed myself to cry. Really cry for the first time since that October evening when I'd learned I was dead to her. The tears came in waves, each one carrying a memory. Sarah at 3 insisting I read just one more story before bed. Sarah at 8 proudly introducing me to her teacher as my mom, the nurse who saves people. Sarah at 12, still willing to hold my hand at the movies if the theater was dark enough. When had I lost her? When had love become such a burden for her to bear? That night, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I would stop trying to be what she needed me to be and start being who I actually was. If that wasn't enough for her, at least it would be honest. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. In January, Sarah approached me with an unusual request. She needed help with a school project, a presentation on everyday heroes in the community. Her first choice, a local firefighter, had fallen through and she was desperate. "Could you maybe help me find someone at your hospital?" she asked, avoiding eye contact. "Like a doctor or something?" I looked at her carefully, noting the anxiety in her posture, the way she fidgeted with her phone. "What about me?" I asked quietly. She actually laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Mom, no offense, but you're just a nurse. I need someone important." The words should have hurt, but instead they crystallized something inside me. "Okay," I said simply. "I'll make some calls." But instead of calling anyone, I began to document my own work. I'd never thought of myself as particularly important. I was just someone who showed up, who did what needed to be done. But as I started keeping track of my days, I began to see my life through different eyes. There was the night I spent 4 hours with a teenage boy who'd overdosed, holding his hand and talking him through his terror while his parents drove through a snowstorm to reach him. There was the elderly man whose family lived across the country, who died peacefully because I sat with him and sang the hymns he requested in his final hours. There was the new mother, barely 18, who learned to breastfeed because I had the patience to show her over and over until she got it right. I thought about Mrs. Vasquez's words about truth and time. Perhaps it was time for Sarah to see who I really was. The night before her presentation, I sat her down at the kitchen table. "I have someone for your project," I said, sliding a folder across to her. She opened it to find photographs, testimonials from patients and their families, documentation of my certifications and continuing education credits, and a detailed account of what my work actually entailed. Her expression shifted as she read, confusion replacing her earlier dismissiveness. "This is about you," she said, looking up at me. "Yes, but," I said, "you said you needed someone important." "I am important, Sarah. Maybe not in the way you thought, but important nonetheless." She was quiet for a long time, turning the pages slowly. I watched her face change as she absorbed the contents, letters from families thanking me for caring for their loved ones, a commendation from the hospital for my work during a particularly difficult flu season, photographs of me at work that somehow made me look competent and professional rather than tired and overwhelmed. "Why didn't you ever tell me about this stuff?" she asked finally. "You never asked," I replied, keeping my voice gentle, "and I suppose I didn't think it mattered to you." That night, I heard her on the phone with her friend Jessie, practicing her presentation. Instead of the embarrassed mumbling I'd grown accustomed to when she mentioned me, her voice carried something different, something that sounded almost like pride. The day of her presentation, I was working a day shift. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Can you pick me up after school? I want to tell you something." When I found her waiting by the main entrance, she looked different somehow, older, more thoughtful. She climbed into my car and sat quietly for a moment before speaking. "I won," she said simply. "Won what?" "The presentation contest. First place." She turned to look at me, and I was startled to see tears in her eyes. "Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know any of it." I pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, giving her space to continue. "When I was researching for the presentation, I called some of your patients' families. The numbers were in the folder you gave me." Her voice was small now, nothing like the confident teenager who'd dismissed me months earlier. "Mrs. Patterson said, You saved her husband's life, that you noticed something the doctors missed, and insisted they run more tests. I remembered Mr. Patterson, a quiet man in his 70s who'd been admitted for what seemed like routine chest pains. Something about his symptoms hadn't felt right to me, and I'd advocated for additional testing that revealed a dangerous blockage. And the Johnsons said you were the only one who could get their daughter to take her medicine after her surgery, that you spent your break time reading to her. Little Emma Johnson, age 7, who'd been terrified of all the adults in white coats until I'd shown up one day with a stack of library books and a willingness to do all the character voices. There were more, Sarah continued, her voice breaking. So many more. They all said the same thing, that you weren't just their nurse, you were the person who made them feel safe, who made them feel like they mattered. I reached over and took her hand, surprised when she didn't pull away. I told everyone you were dead because I was ashamed, she whispered. But I was ashamed of the wrong things. I was ashamed that you worked nights and smelled like the hospital and drove an old car. I didn't know that you were, she struggled for the words, that you were a hero. The word hung between us, strange and wonderful. I thought of all the times I'd felt invisible, irrelevant, embarrassing. I thought of the nights I'd questioned whether anything I did mattered, whether I was enough for this daughter who seemed to find my very existence burdensome. I'm sorry, Mom, she said, and now she was crying in earnest. I'm so sorry for saying those things, for being such a brat, for not seeing you. I pulled her into my arms then, this daughter who'd grown too tall while I wasn't paying attention, whose hair smelled like the expensive shampoo she'd bought with her babysitting money. She felt both familiar and foreign, this person I'd loved so fiercely and lost so completely. I'm proud of you, I whispered into her hair. Not for winning the contest, but for being brave enough to look past your embarrassment and see the truth. We sat in the car for a long time, holding each other while the winter sun slanted through the windshield. I thought about justice, not the dramatic, vengeful kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that comes when truth finally has room to breathe. That evening, Sarah insisted on cooking dinner. She made chicken teriyaki, my recipe, the one I'd taught her years ago when she was still interested in spending time with me in the kitchen. As we ate, she told me about her presentation, about how her classmates had reacted when she described my work. Jessie's mom is a lawyer, she said, twirling noodles around her fork, and Jessie always acts like that's such a big deal. But when I told everyone about how you held Mrs. Chen's hand when she was dying, no relation, different Chen, and how her family sent you a card every year on the anniversary, Jessie started crying. I smiled, remembering Mrs. Chen, a tiny woman who died peacefully, because I'd made sure she wasn't alone. I want to volunteer at the hospital this summer, Sarah continued. If you think they'd let me, I want to understand what you do, really understand it. The months that followed weren't perfect. Sarah was still 16, still capable of eye-rolling and door-slamming, and the particular cruelty that comes with adolescence. But something fundamental had shifted between us. She began asking about my work, really asking not just polite questions, but genuine interest in the details of my days. She started introducing me differently. Instead of mumbling my name when her friends came over, she would say, "This is my mom, Margaret. She's a nurse at County General." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and it never failed to surprise me, even months later. More importantly, she began to see me as a person separate from her own needs and embarrassments. She noticed when I was tired, when I was worried about a patient, when I was proud of something I'd accomplished at work. She learned to read my moods the way I'd always been able to read hers. One evening in late spring, as I was getting ready for a night shift, she appeared in my doorway holding a cup of coffee, made exactly the way I liked it. "Long night ahead?" she asked, settling onto my bed while I laced up my sneakers. "Rodriguez is having surgery tomorrow, and her family is nervous. I want to make sure she's comfortable tonight." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Will you tell her?" I said hi. "She remembers me from when I came to the hospital Christmas party." I looked up, surprised. "You want me to mention you to a patient?" She flushed slightly. "I mean, only if it's appropriate. I liked her. She seemed sweet." This from the girl who'd once told her friends I was dead, rather than admit I worked at a hospital. The transformation still took my breath away sometimes. As summer arrived, Sarah began her volunteer work in the hospital's pediatric ward. Watching her read to the children, seeing her natural gentleness emerge as she helped them with craft projects or simply sat with them when they were scared. I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with witnessing her discover her own capacity for caring. I get it now, she told me one afternoon as we drove home from the hospital together. Why you love this work. It's not about being important or impressive. It's about being present when people need you most. By the time she started her senior year, the girl who'd once been embarrassed by my existence had become my fiercest advocate. When her English teacher assigned a personal essay about courage, she wrote about me. When her friends complained about their parents, she defended me with a ferocity that both amused and touched me. When college applications asked about people who'd influenced her, my name appeared in essay after essay. The justice I'd found wasn't the kind that comes with dramatic confrontations or spectacular revenge. It was quieter than that, more lasting. It was the justice of being seen finally and fully for who I'd always been. It was the justice of discovering that love doesn't have to be earned through perfection, that sometimes the most profound recognition comes not from strangers, but from the people who know us best and choose to look past their own limitations to see us clearly. Now, as I write this story, Sarah is finishing her first year of nursing school. She calls me every Sunday, and our conversations are rich with the kind of understanding that only comes when two people speak the same language of service and compassion. She's dating a young man who treats her with respect and who isn't intimidated by the strength she learned from watching me navigate single motherhood. She's grown into someone I not only love but genuinely like, someone whose company I seek out, whose opinions I value, whose future I anticipate with excitement rather than anxiety. The house where we live hasn't changed much. The hardwood floors still creak in the same places. The kitchen counters still bear the scars of years of hurried meal preparation. But it feels different now, not like a museum of my irrelevance, but like a home where two strong women learned to see each other clearly and chose to build something beautiful from the foundation of that recognition. Sometimes, late at night when I'm at the hospital, I think about that October evening when I overheard Sarah tell her friend I was dead. The memory no longer carries the sharp edge of betrayal it once did. Instead, it feels like the beginning of a longer story, one about the difference between being invisible and being overlooked, between being unloved and being unrecognized. The deepest wounds aren't always the ones inflicted by enemies. Sometimes they come from the people we love most, the ones whose opinions matter enough to devastate us. But healing is possible, even from that kind of hurt. It requires patience, honesty, and the courage to remain open to love even when love has disappointed us. I learned that I am enough, not because I'm perfect, but because I show up. Day after day, night after night. I show up for my patients, for my daughter, for the life I've chosen to build, that consistency, that reliability, that willingness to be present in the difficult moments. These are their own kind of heroism. Sarah learned that embarrassment is often just fear wearing a disguise, and that the people we love are worth the risk of being proud of them, even when they don't fit the narrow definitions of success our culture promotes. She learned that strength comes in many forms, and that the women who change the world aren't always the ones who make headlines. Together, we learned that forgiveness isn't a single moment, but a daily choice, and that some of the most important conversations happen not with words, but with actions, with presence, with attention, with the gradual accumulation of small kindnesses that eventually add up to something like grace. The story isn't over. Sarah will graduate, will become the kind of nurse who changes lives the way I hope I've changed some. She'll make mistakes, will disappoint people she loves, will need forgiveness of her own, but she'll know how to apologize sincerely and how to rebuild trust through consistent action. She'll know that being seen and valued isn't a luxury but a necessity, and she'll make sure the people in her care feel both. As for me, I continue to show up. At the hospital, where my presence has become synonymous with competence and compassion. At home, where I'm no longer a ghost but a woman who takes up exactly the right amount of space. In my own life, where I've learned to see myself through eyes cleared of shame and self-doubt. The betrayal that nearly broke me ultimately led to the deepest kind of healing, not just the mending of a relationship, but the discovery of my own worth. In learning to forgive Sarah for not seeing me, I learned to forgive myself for believing I wasn't worth seeing. In watching her grow into someone capable of recognition and remorse, I grew into someone capable of receiving both with grace. This is what justice looks like when it's not about punishment but about restoration. This is what courage looks like when it's not about dramatic gestures, but about the daily choice to remain open to love, even after love has wounded us. This is what healing looks like when it comes not from forgetting the hurt, but from transforming it into something useful, something that makes us more compassionate rather than more bitter. The girl who once told her friends I was dead now tells everyone she meets that I'm her hero. The woman who once believed she was invisible now knows she's essential. The story that began with betrayal has become a story about the power of truth, patience, and the remarkable resilience of love when it's given room to grow back stronger than before.